All right, what's up, Alabama fans? It's Andrew Bone here with BamaInsider.com, just bringing you guys a weekly recruiting update, fill you guys in on the very latest recruiting news for the Alabama Crimson Tide. We're kind of in that time period where we're waiting until the summer kicks off, summer camps, official visits, kind of like what we did last year. There was a lot of buildup for the summer. Uh, Visits were finally resuming after a year off from COVID. So we saw a lot of different kids visit in the month of June, really not knowing if they were going to be able to visit again, if they were going to visit in the fall, or if official visits and the NCAA were going to shut things down because of COVID again. So many recruits made decisions during the summer. They took all their official visits. And what we're seeing right now is we're starting to see a lot of recruits schedule their visits for the month of June, but we're also seeing some scheduled visits for the fall already. So I think that indicates that we're going to see more decisions happening in the fall. Kids deciding to stretch things out. Obviously, recruiting is a lot different these days than they have been in years past. But what we're going to see this year, as far as official visits are concerned, especially for Alabama. Last year recruits had not been on campus in more than a year. Most of these junior recruits who were visiting Alabama, they were coming in during the summer. A lot of them were saying they were going to make decisions. So Alabama had to bring a lot of those guys in on official visits. A lot of them didn't have actual committable offers. They may have been offered during the spring, but a lot of the times, those offers that go out during the spring, you still have to show up. You have to show up to camp. You have to work out. You at least have to spend some time with the coaching staff. And I think there were several guys who came in last summer on official visits because, like I said, there just wasn't a clear indication that visits were going to be allowed in the fall, or kids were going to, even visit without taking an official visit to that school. So Alabama had to use a lot of those official visits last summer for guys that maybe after the visit they decided that those weren't guys that they were going to recruit anymore, or guys that they felt like were good enough to play at Alabama. But this year, a little bit different, because what we have seen this year as compared to last year, coaches have been able to get back out on the road. They've been able to go to fall games. They've been able to go to kids have been able to come to junior days. You have the spring evaluation period, the winter evaluation period. A lot of different evaluation tools for Alabama and all the other coaches throughout the entire country to see these kids and really know who you want to recruit. Obviously, there's going to be guys that are going to come into camp, that are going to show out, that are going to earn offers, that are going to move up the recruiting board. But you got a little bit better of an idea right now as to who your main targets are, who you want to bring in for officials. So most of the official visitors that we're starting to see schedule their trips, a lot of these guys, actually most of them, if not all, are guys that have committable offers from Alabama that don't have to come to camp. There might still be some that Alabama would like to see. Let's say that they're an athlete. They play on, defensive back and wide receiver. Get them to camp, let them work out, try to figure out what's their best position. Where do you want to, where do you see them playing in the future? Where do they see themselves playing in the future? Because a lot of these guys that I've talked to throughout the year, a lot of them say, hey, I play wide receiver, play DB, or maybe I play tight end and defensive end. No preference as to where they want to play in college. So get to camp, work out, work with the coaches, try to decide, is this a coach that I want to be coached by for the next 3 to 4 years? We used to say next 4 to 5 years because kids were fine with the red shirting. Now everybody wants to leave after their junior year, so you got to say the next 3 to 4 years. But what we are seeing is a lot of priority targets for Alabama scheduling their official visits for the month of June. I'm going to get into some of these official visits here pretty soon, but I do want to talk about a couple in-state kids that have announced favorites over the course of the last few days. Kelby Collins out of Gardendale High School, one of the premier defensive linemen in the country. And, we all believe that Alabama is the favorite for him. He grew up an Alabama fan. He's in an Alabama household, a defensive line priority position for the Crimson Tide. He's being recruited by Freddie Roach, who's the D-line coach and also his area recruiter, and that relationship has been going on for a very long time. But obviously, some other schools are fighting hard for Kelby Collins, including Oklahoma, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. Now, what's interesting about Kelby Collins is he is going to take visits this summer. He's already said that he's going to take an official to Alabama that final weekend before the early signing period in December. So, the fact that Alabama is going to get him on campus for an official visit in December, likely going to get him back in town at some point in the month of June. I think that bodes well for the Crimson Tide. Obviously, some other schools are going to get him in for officials this summer, and going to have a chance to really impress. But in the end, I still think that Alabama is in great shape with Gardendale defensive lineman Kelby Collins, who is a priority target. Another in-state defensive lineman who has announced his finalists this week is Hunter Osborne. His finalists included Alabama, Auburn, Texas, LSU, Clemson, and Tennessee. Now, I expect Hunter Osborne to make it back to Tuscaloosa in June, likely going to work out for Alabama at Alabama's camp. Now, this is a guy that Alabama has evaluated throughout the year. He attended camp last summer. Staff has, really taken a strong liking to him. Yeah, I don't know if he needs to necessarily camp, but with the amount of defensive line targets that are out there, you're not going to take, 10, 12 defensive linemen in a class. Alabama's going to take 5, 6, maybe 7 defensive linemen. So you want to make sure you're making the right decisions there. Obviously, some really good in-state defensive linemen in this recruiting class. But every time Alabama sees Hunter Osborne, he continues to get better. So every time they see him, he's continued to improve himself. And I think that there's a good chance that we could see Hunter Osborne in Alabama's recruiting class down the road. Now, Malik Bryant. Malik Bryant, we've already talked about him. We talked about him about a week ago. He announced his top 5 schools. We know he's going to be making that decision on July the 23rd. He's going to take some officials in the month of June before making that decision. But one school that he's not going to take an official visit to, at least in June, is Alabama. He's going to save that official visit date for the Crimson Tide for this fall, which I think that is actually a good sign for the Crimson Tide. The fact that he is going to come to Tuscaloosa on June the 3rd and the 4th, just as an unofficial visitor. So let's say he ends up making that commitment to another school in July. He's still going to end up visiting Alabama during the season. So they're still going to have a chance there. But as of right now, I think Alabama's in the driver's seat, and they're going to have a chance to get him on campus for a few days in June, and then when he makes that decision in July, I think Alabama's in really good shape there. So Alabama, Miami, Florida, USC, and UCF, the finalists for Malik Bryant, top outside linebacker recruit in the country. But let's talk about these official visitors that are coming up in the month of June. Now, it's going to start right off the bat. It's going to start June 3rd. We're going to see some top guys that are going to be in town. Brandon Ennis, the number 1 wide receiver in the country. Riley Williams is a big 6'7", 230-pound tight end out of Oregon, going to be making his way to Alabama. You have Cole Adams, who's a wide receiver out of Oklahoma, also scheduled to visit Alabama that weekend as well. June the 10th, though, now this is a big visit weekend. Alabama currently has 8 official visitors scheduled for that June the 10th weekend. 6 of those guys are in the Rivals 100. I don't know if this is going to end up being Alabama's biggest recruiting weekend of the entire recruiting cycle, but it certainly looks like it might be. First off, incredible group of offensive linemen that are going to be coming in. You have Caden Proctor, who's the number 1 offensive lineman in the country out of Iowa. You have Francis Mauagua, who is the number 2 offensive tackle in the country, going to be making his first ever visit to Alabama. You have Olas Alinen, the Finnish-born offensive lineman out of Connecticut, going to be making I think this is his 4th trip to Alabama. It's going to be the first time his parents visit Alabama, though. So I think this is going to be a big weekend for him. Could potentially see a decision shortly after. He does have some other official visits scheduled, but with Alabama being in the driver's seat, coming in for an official visit that weekend with his family, could he potentially go ahead and make a decision shortly after? I think it's very possible. And then you also have Wilkin Formby, who's a local lineman from Northridge High School in Tuscaloosa. So you have 4 big-time offensive linemen that are all scheduled. I wouldn't be surprised if we see another offensive lineman or two ended up making a trip to Alabama that weekend, but getting 4 of your top guys, 4 offensive linemen that all have committable offers from Alabama all on campus that same weekend. I'm sure uh, new Alabama offensive line coach Eric Wolford is extremely excited about that. I'm sure the Alabama coaches are happy because this is going to be one of those classes where Alabama signs at least 5 offensive linemen. Currently sitting at 0 offensive line commitments, but I think they got a really good chance to have a great offensive line class. You have these guys that are major targets that are all going to be in town that weekend. You also have guys like Miles McVay out of East St. Louis High School in Illinois, who's going to visit Alabama in June for an unofficial, but also make a trip back to Tuscaloosa for an official in the fall. Raquez McElderry out of Addison High School, currently committed to Georgia. Peyton Kirkland out of Orlando is going to be making a trip to Alabama that first week of June. So a lot of big offensive linemen going to be making visits to Alabama early in the month of June. Also on that June 10th weekend, you have Richard Young, the number 2 running back in the country, one of Alabama's premier targets, visiting. You have Anthony Hill, number 1 inside linebacker in the country out of Texas, going to be making a visit to Alabama. Eli Holstien. Alabama fans know about Eli Holstien, one of the top quarterbacks in the country, one of Alabama's top targets, and this is going to be his 4th visit to Alabama alone in 2022. If you visit to Alabama last year in 2021, this will be his 4th trip to Alabama this year. And then Raul Aguirre, who is one of the top linebackers out of the state of Georgia, also scheduled to make a trip to Alabama on that June the 10th weekend. So very big weekend on June the 10th. It's going to carry over into that next week where we're going to see guys like Justice Haynes, the number 1 running back in the country, Caleb Down, the top safety in the country, Makari Vickers, one of the premier defensive backs in the country out of Tallahassee. Also, Shelton Sampson, 5-star wide receiver out of Louisiana, just announced his official visit to Alabama on that June 17th weekend. So June 10th, June 17th, very big weekends for the Alabama Crimson Tide on the official visit front. We're going to see a lot more official visits that are going to get scheduled over the course of the next few weeks. It may even be the week of that we find out this kid's coming into town, that kid's coming in town, this guy's who's committed to another school is going to be making a special trip. But like I said earlier, we are starting to also see guys schedule those visits for the fall. I'm still kind of interested to see what's going to happen as far as commitments. Currently, Alabama's sitting with 3 commitments in its 2023 recruiting class. Everybody keeps wondering when's the next one going to pop? When are 5 more going to jump on board? Once we start seeing Alabama's key targets start committing elsewhere, then you start to get worried. I don't think you got to worry too much anymore because at least right now, because none of their targets are making decisions just yet. We're seeing guys announce commitments, but most of them aren't on Alabama's recruiting board, or at least high on Alabama's recruiting board. So once you start seeing their key targets make decisions and it's not for Alabama, then you start to worry. As we saw the last couple of years, Alabama fans were a little nervous going into the summer because there weren't a lot of commitments. I think you went into the summer last year, 4 commitments. The year before that, 3 commitments. Alabama finished number 1 and number 2. According to Rivals.com. So I think this is going to be a similar case this year. There's a lot of big-time guys that are out there that they are sitting in very good shape with, that once they start taking their official visits, start making their decisions, the ball should roll well into Alabama's way. And then our final discussion of the day, Jordan Addison, wide receiver from Pitt, won the Biletnikoff Award. We've talked about him over the course of the last couple of weeks since he entered the transfer portal, visited Texas, visited USC. There's been some talk about him visiting Alabama, and he has been in contact with the Crimson Tide, has been in contact with Alabama ever since he's entered the portal. There has been discussions about making a trip to Alabama. Now, there was never anything set in stone, never indicated that he would visit, but Alabama did recruit him. They're trying to get him. But as we've all seen today, it looks like he has narrowed it down to Texas and USC. Now, does Alabama necessarily need another wide receiver? No. They got 2 from the portal this year, and Jermaine Burton and Tyler Harrell. Got some great young talent at the receiver position as well. But at the same time, you don't say no to the Bolitnikoff Award winner if he wants to visit, especially if you can find a spot on your team for him. So Alabama was certainly eager and willing to bring him in for a visit, but looks like he probably won't visit. And you know what? That's just fine. Alabama's going to be okay. So that's it for the recruiting update today on the Bama Insider channel. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.